I still have a feeling he might end up in the Ballyburn.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of The Jump Show. It's episode 6 in the Ante-Post Cheltenham Festival series, and we are raring to go back from what was a very enjoyable weekend at the Dublin Racing Festival. All three of us were there. Before we begin, please do like and subscribe to our video. It really helps us out. We'd love to reach a few landmarks this week, perhaps 150 likes. That would be great. We'll start with that. But on the Dublin Racing Festival, I have to say, from my point of view, I had the most wonderful time. I thought the facilities were excellent. I thought the general spirits of everyone there was very high. There was a huge amount of positivity, and it was a pleasure to be alongside the Irish for their bread and butter. So I had lots of good things to say. The only thing I didn't particularly enjoy so much was the general competition of the racing, which was very much in favour of Monsieur Mullins. I know that it's taken all three of us a bit of a time to recover from the weekend. Dan, how's your general health?
Well, it won't be a surprise to anyone to learn it's pretty poor. Yet again, it's just the road to Cheltenham. My health deteriorates with each week. Like I'm going to have to be wheeled there in a hospital bed come March, I believe. But the journey back on Monday may have been the most excruciating 12 hours of my life. I was mainly a post-race come down and also just an utter health disgrace. But my God, what a couple of days it was. I fully agree with you, Tom. I'd say probably the most enjoyable 2-day race experience I've had. Just constantly good stuff. Obviously meeting so many people. Thank you to everyone who came up to us and had a good conversation with us. All of that, so good. Definitely would be looking to go back next year, although I would dare suspect I may heed some lessons from this year in terms of general behaviour for my sins.
We all know no lessons will be learned. Right. And Jake, you actually did play it quite sensibly, didn't you, leaving after Sunday's racing?
Well, I don't know how sensible getting up at 2:30 in the morning was to get a flight out there for the Saturday, but yeah, as you said, I went home on the Sunday, but made a good night of it on the Saturday. As Dan said, it was great to meet so many of you yet again, and like you guys, like the whole weekend was brilliant. Obviously, Dublin's always going to be amazing when you go over there. I've never had a bad weekend in Dublin, but yeah, the Leopardstown was surprisingly absolutely fine to get there, absolutely fine to go to a toilet. I didn't see any of those problems that other people seem to have had. But look, we know what the racing was like. It's going to be the Willie Mullins show. I think we were more than happy to just pass up a couple of races, which was a bit of a shame in terms of how much Grade 1 standard there was. But other than that, it was a brilliant weekend. And yeah, like Dan, I'm definitely going back another year.
Let's move on to the actual racing then. And we thought there'd be a lot of clues, didn't we? We thought it would be informative going into the meeting, and it certainly didn't disappoint in that regard. We learned a lot about the big Irish players for plenty of the races. And Jake, we'll start by looking at one of your big fancies Ante-Post for the Cheltenham Festival in Cargase, who is now second favourite for the Triumph. Look, we all saw how good Sergino was at Cheltenham the other day, but of the Irish, she looks the main contender now.
Yeah, exactly that. It was a good start to the weekend for me in that regard. Second race in, we'd just seen the opening where Dancing City had won at 16-1. We were all thinking, is it going to be one of those weekends? But yeah, Cargase came in. She settled a lot better this time. It wasn't perfect. Like she was, a little bit keen in the very early stages of the race, but that middle part of the race, she travelled so much nicer. She was allowed horses to go past her, and turning up the back straight. I think she had about 4 or 5 horses in front of her. But once she jumped that second last, she was absolutely cruising. Came around the home bend, looking by far the best horse in the race, and she probably would have gone on to score much easier than she did had she not messed up that last. It was quite a bad mistake watching it back, but yeah, she still went on to record a 1.5 length success. I thought she was good. I think I've seen a lot of people crapping the form already, saying they all finish in a heat type thing. But as I said, I think she could have won that by further if she didn't mess up that last. I think she looked by far the best horse in the race, as I said, by the way that she just travelled into it around the home bend and quickened up. Yes, again, we saw plenty of money for her before the off. She went off 7-2 in the end. It's a running theme, as Dan has flagged in the past, about Kenny Alexander horses. And that she's currently 6-1 second far for the Triumph. She's got it all to do against Sergino. Clearly, he looks a top horse. But getting the £7. I'm sure that she'll get some more support before the off. People will be trying to back these horses in behind as well that potentially may improve. I can concede that there may be improvement to come, but I think she's the best hope of beating Sergino. And we've got a good ticket, so let's ride it all the way through, and fingers crossed we get lucky on the day.
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. Couldn't agree more. I would say actually this year that the juveniles in our country, in Britain, are strong. Like, we've got a really strong hand. Not only got Sergino, obviously Bidet Road needs to bounce back, but before last time he looked very exciting. And of course, Paul Nicholls has got Khalif de Burlay. We might not see him at Cheltenham, but wherever he does go, he looks pretty exciting too. So lots to look forward to from this side of the water. But Jake, you're holding on to a nice position with Cargate, which is good to see as well. Let's move on to Dan, shall we, and talk about the next race we're going to discuss, and that was Marine Nationale, who was, I've got down here in the running order, woeful, and I think that's probably a fairly good description in a race that was eventually won by Il Était Temps.
Yeah, so two contrasting times I've watched Marine Nationale with our good friend Andrew Blair White. First one being in Supreme, where he nearly had a heart attack on the stands as I was pelting him in the chest when he looked so impressive. This time there weren't such vigorous reactions, and really mystifying performance to a certain extent. I mean, I've seen some people blame the ground, obviously seemed to be soft, but it was softer on the hurdles track. I'm not sure that was the obvious excuse. Just seemed to be his usual strong travelling self. Just held his head a bit awkwardly, lacked fluency at a few fences, jumped a bit slow, and it was beaten fairly convincingly and quite a far way out. So you've got to believe that isn't his running. I for one, would still be very hard pressed to back him in at Arkle, even at 9-4 now. I think it would take some training performance to bring him back after such a disappointing performance. And then Let's Tom did what he did in the 2-mile novice hurdle last year. He kind of took advantage of some underperformances to win at the DRF, and he clearly loves Leopardstown. And he's a horse I've had a lot of time for. Obviously, he ran a stormer in the juvenile hurdle a couple of years ago on his debut. Just seems to love the place. So maybe one to keep an eye out for when kept to Leopardstown. I'd be maybe surprised if he batted up at Cheltenham. Hasn't always done that. Definitely hasn't done it the past couple of years. So maybe a note of caution on him. And the Arkle picture is now extremely muddy. I remember we had like an 8-minute debate over dinner, which was videoed in very grainy fashion about why. I was just mainly winding everyone up saying Master Chewy is going to win an Arkle. Like, it's just one of those years where it's got Western Warhorse, what could happen vibes, in my opinion. So we learn a lot in a lot of races, and this one, I think we came out just scratching our heads.
Yeah, I think we did. What I would say about the race is that it was probably the most exciting of the whole meeting. Actually, I thought it was a real thriller.
Good finish.
Yeah, really good finish. And the other thing I wanted to say was that I put up Hunter's Yarn for the Arkle at 16-1 on this show a few episodes ago, and it's starting to look better and better. I know that Il Était Temps at the moment is Willie Mullins' number one in the race, at least according to the market, but at the same time, all he's had to do is sit in his box to get shorter. He hasn't had to do anything. Well, others have just fallen down by the wayside. So it's one of those, absolutely, as you say, Dan. So anything could happen, but I'm quite happy with Hunter's Yarn. The only problem with him is his jumping. He needs to work on that a little bit. But I think generally he's quite a good leaper. He's just prone to hitting the odd one quite badly, which obviously you don't want to do at Cheltenham. But hopefully they've schooled him senseless so he can produce a nice product.
The dream's still alive.
Yeah, well, yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so. Cool. On to the next one, Galopin Des Champs. I'll quickly touch on this one. I don't think there's a huge amount to say about this, apart from the fact that for the first time in the last 3 outings, he actually got the better of Fast or Slow, who never really looked like he was going to lay a handle on Galopin Des Champs. I think in the last couple of starts, Willie Mullins' chaser has just refound his best. He's really rediscovered that form of last year. I think it's taken a couple of runs this term to get back to it, but he looks a proper star, doesn't he? Right again, and it's good to see. And he'll be very hard to beat in the Gold Cup. Fast or Slow, I think potentially might drop in trip. Jake, that's as a possible rumour about that in the Ryanair potentially.
Yeah, I think David Casey was trying to push them that way, wasn't he? Well, on Nick Luck the other day, saying about how they should run him in the Ryanair. But no, I think they'll go for the Gold Cup with him, to be honest. You've got to have at least one crack at it, haven't you, when you've got a horse like him who's in the prime position to take his chance. So at least have one crack at it. Okay, if you get beat, then maybe you can go Ryanair next year. But I think he'll be going Gold Cup this year, and he's definitely the main danger for me.
Yeah, he's the main danger for me too. We don't know what Shishkin and Lompresse and the English types can do really up against those good guys, do we yet? So that's going to be fascinating. And indeed, Corrick Rambler. Okay. On to Factor File beating Gaelic Warrior, which I have to say, in my 31 years visiting a racecourse, was one of the most farcical spectacles I've ever seen. Dan, what did you make of it?
Yeah, very strange experience to watch this. I mean, by all accounts, I didn't see Gallic in the parade ring, but did everything wrong in the parade ring and then did everything wrong on track, basically. Jumping wasn't the reason. He jumps pretty straight for the most part. Obviously, points were made about going left-handed, but Leopardstown, a lot of the jumping is done in a straight line. And to his credit, he actually jumped relatively straight, just completely down tools, once headed, and ran no sort of race. So maybe I'm cautious of writing off individuals as quirky straight away, but it's a bit of a concern when a horse just kind of just seems to stop to nothing after being headed and seemingly wanted to head out quite early doors, played up in the parade ring. A lot of worrying signs then. Obviously, his price has drifted markedly for the Turners now, whether they just keep him to right-handed tracks in the future and maybe aim him, long-term aim being the King George, may be the play rather than going to Cheltenham, which probably is definitely not going to suit him, especially on this evidence. Obviously, Fact of File is maybe somewhat difficult to assess based on how Gaelic Warrior performed, but the time compared very favourably to Hartwood in the handicap. I mean, I was a bit quick to maybe not crab him, but doubt the extent to which he was hyped up by some people. Some people were saying this is the next Cordo Star. He's going to be a Gold Cup horse for the next 4 years and he'll go down as the all-time great, which seemed a bit in the extreme and still is an extreme, but there was a lot to like about this. He just looked very professional, jumped really well. I think showed a bit more speed than maybe I thought he had to a certain extent. I thought he would be a real proper stayer going down, but he's got a couple of options now to going into Cheltenham. Could go the 2.5, could go 3 mile route, but I think he'll be extremely popular in the build up to this. For all that the substance of this race could be questioned to a certain extent, but just looks a very professional, likable individual.
Totally agree. He looks very solid, doesn't he? And he looks the type who's just going to jump, find, and run very well wherever he goes. Good stuff, Dan. Last one we're going to talk about in detail, at least, is Ballyburn. I think we were all pretty taken by this. Certainly you were. It was the performance of the week, voted by the viewers. 58% thought Ballyburn was the best of the weekend. Supreme or Ballymore, I suppose, is a question mark. I'd be much more inclined for him to go to the Supreme. I think he's got more than enough pace in which we're looking at a contest where, I mean, really, he stands out, doesn't he, Jake? I mean, there's not a lot to say apart from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's only a Willie Mullins horse. We could talk about winning a Grade 1 as easily and as impressively as he did, and we still don't know which race he's going to go for. Like, it's literally only that yard that could produce this type of horse. He looks a Supreme type all over, doesn't he? Like, obviously, we know he stays 2.5. We know he could go for the further race, just like Sir Gerhard did a couple of years back, but he could just, he is the best horse in that Supreme by far, isn't he? I know they're talking about mystical power being in there and being that other Supreme chance, but for my money, but Ballyburn would absolutely destroy him over 2 miles, over 2.5 miles, over any trip. So yeah, it's one of those things. I thought his performance on Sunday, as you know, as everyone voted, but the most impressive, it probably was the most impressive of the weekend. It definitely was the performance where you actually stood back and went, wow, that's a really good Willie Mullins horse, rather than, oh, another Willie Mullins winner. So yeah, really good. I hope he goes Supreme. Paul Townend will probably want the ride in the Supreme. He doesn't really have one, is he? If he doesn't go for that Supreme, he'd be on more of an outsider than a favourite anyway. But then again, if he goes to the Ballymore, obviously he'll be on the favourite for that as well. So it's one of those tricky situations. We're not going to learn anything until probably the couple of days before. But we'll listen to the rumours during the preview circuit and we'll see what happens. But yeah, he looks a Supreme type all over to me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Dan, are you in the Supreme camp too with Ballyburn? And also, I don't know if you want to say anything on either El Fabiolo or Stateman. Of course, you both won pretty easily.
I mean, on Ballyburn, I still have a feeling he might end up in the Ballymore, and maybe that's part of my no flies on him bias, just asking him to go anywhere else, because I think it'll be basically impossible to oppose wherever he goes based on what we've seen. Keeps improving. He's basically just confirming what we thought in bumpers, that he's extremely top class, and there was nothing really not to like about this performance. And I'd say this is probably the best novice hurdle we've seen run all season, and he's won it cozily as he could ever ask to do. There's so many variables, as we mentioned. There's so many horses that could get really rooted in different directions. Obviously, Illidanti, reading Tommy Ron, Mystical Power, all these kind of horses are maybe like the B tier of Willie Mullins novices. Some of them could go literally to any race, it seems. So there'd be a lot of variables yet, and I've kind of almost half given up trying to guess. And I think at the prices now, because they're also he's so short for both races, you don't really need to. I'd say just back him wherever he turns up. On Stateman, just the most likable horse you'll probably ever see. Just never runs a bad race. So good, so professional. Does everything right. Obviously, Impere Pass absolutely despised being out in front. He just, from moment one, he hated that. So that experiment has quickly been shelved. And obviously, we'll see him over fences next year. And maybe it's a bit of a season wasted to a certain extent. Maybe he goes to Aintree now fresh rather than going to Cheltenham. Obviously, he's been scratched from the stairs hurdle. And El Fabiolo just, again, confirms how impressively good he is. And Dino Blue, if she stays, which I suspect she will, she'll take a hell of a lot of beating in the mare's chase as well.
I think she'd be really hard to beat, actually. I completely agree with you. I had a couple of decent judges, actually, at the DRF interest me quite greatly, actually, with their views on State Man up against Constitution Hill in the Champion Hurdle. And there were a few people who you'd have to respect their opinions who thought that State Man could easily give Constitution Hill a proper race this year. A, for the fact that they think he's improved this season. I would agree with that. I think he probably has. Come on again. B, for the fact that he could change tactics and go from the front, which is an angle that I really like. And I hope they do go from the front with him and give Constitution Hill something to aim at, because State Man, we all know what he can do from the front, and I think it might be easier for him to maybe unsettle Constitution Hill. Jake, I don't know what you think about that. State Man, any more of a chance, do you think, this year of unsettling or unruffling his feathers slightly?
I think there's a much better chance than last year. I think Willie Mullins said that himself, didn't he, about how he thinks he's in a much better position to take on Constitution Hill this year. And clearly, with Constitution Hill being off and scoping dirty, etc., he's not had the ideal prep that perhaps Nicky would have wanted him to have. So look, there's every chance that he can give him a race. I think I heard a lot of people talking about, with there being so little runners probably likely to run up, that you could back State Man each way at around, I think it was 7-2. I'm not sure if that's still the price now, but 3 places. And that's, okay, you might lose a little bit of your money there on the place terms, but it's still a decent bet. So yeah, I can absolutely hear that. Hopefully they do turn up in top form and we can see a proper clash between them, because the race needs it, because outside of that, we're not going to get anything really standing up, are we? So fingers crossed that those two can make a show of it themselves.
And thank goodness for State Man being around, really, because without him, Constitution Hill would have absolutely nothing. Perish the thought, we could easily get a walkover in a Champion Hurdle. I think, if he wasn't around, there'd be a couple of horses thrown in there to get the prize money for second, third, and fourth, wouldn't there? But, without State Man, there'd be no competition whatsoever.
Hey, don't you disrespect Not So Sleepy like that. He'll be there.
Yeah, he'll be there.
Someone's there to suggest State Man runs in the county hurdle instead.
Oh,
It might be the most. Yeah, no, it's fine. He's just won pretty much every grade one he's ever turned up in, bar one. But you get him in that handicap, Willie. You get him there.
What's that as well?
This is racing. Imagine the state of that. God almighty. What a disgrace that would be.
It really would be. The game would be fully in disrepute, wouldn't it, if that happened? One more performance then to take away from the DRF. Dan, start with you.
Yes, it came in that juvenile race, and to be fair, I think at the start I fell in love with Madgeborough. It just looked so much bigger than the rest. It was quite funny. Like, he looked like he's actually the wrong horse has turned up in this race. He was just head and shoulders above them all and ran really well. I think obviously a bit of a learning mission for them. First start in the UK, went from the front, looked like he was going to get swamped and finish out the back at the last, but then rallied again to only be beaten just over a length. I thought that was really likeable, showed a great attitude. I think some of I've seen suggest he's the each-way play in the Triumph Hurdle market. I think still he's just going to be one for a bit more time. I can't really see him at this stage getting to the level he's going to need to beat Sergino. Personally, and this is coming from a horse I absolutely adore, but I think in time he could well prove to be the best of the horses we've seen in the Spring Juvenile. But obviously, in long-term future, he's definitely going to be over fences.
He was a gorgeous-looking type, wasn't he? I mean, everyone commented on that. He's spectacular to look at, yeah. I can't wait to see him in the future. And Jake, what are you taking out from the DRF aside from the other ones you mentioned?
Yeah, I'm going to touch on last week's selection, Percival Legalwa, in that Leopardstown handicap chase over 2.5 miles. Obviously, Hartwood ended up running out a very impressive winner, went up £12 in the handicap for it. But I was kind of watching the race through my hands, really, watching Percival just absolutely tank round the home bend and tank into the race. He came up to the last, obviously, looking like he'd have every chance, took a fall, and was very unlucky. I think at the time I kind of thought that he would probably go on to win it. Having watched it back, perhaps Hartwood pulled out more, and it was just my fear of Percival winning that really took over and made me think that he's going to win that. But either way, he went up £5 to a rating of 137 in Ireland. I think that's absolutely fine in terms of if they want to go for the Kinmure, they probably still can. Obviously, if that's the plan or not will remain to be seen. Hopefully it is, because he would have finished ahead of Cool Survivor and Good Time Johnny as well, who were both running on, and perhaps they're ones to take forward if Percival doesn't run. But Yeah, I thought Percival was very good. Obviously, he was very unlucky. I'm glad he didn't win for my bet at Cheltenham. And yeah, he seemingly was absolutely fine after the race as well. So we'll see where he turns up next. But I thought he was very good.
Yeah, I thought he was good too, I have to say. I'm just going to put in Brucio in the Mayor's Handicap Hurdle. She was pretty much the only one to make any kind of headway when Mixed Tiara went clear. There was very few mares who got into it. Usually it's a pretty exciting race and you get plenty of clues from it. But I would say this year there weren't many. Brucio was the standout. And what I liked about her is that she came from that Catterick maiden hurdle victory. And so often you see this, don't you, with horses? You go and win, get a confidence boost at a low level, and then they're stepped up in class. And actually, they produce what they are capable of doing. I thought she was pretty impressive. She's up to a mark 127 now. She's going to need to go up again if she wants to get into a handicap at Cheltenham. And she's not got any novice entries, any entries at the festival. So I think we might not see her at Cheltenham, but we could see her later in the season, like a Punchestown or a Fairy House potentially. Given she's had a couple of quick runs in succession too, but I thought she was really impressive in that race, and I thought she did really well. So keep an eye on Brucio going forward. She's still got plenty of mileage, I think, in that handicap mark, even raised, I think it's £11 or something like that for that really impressive victory. Okay, that's the DRF covered. Just some Cheltenham updates to give you generally. Jeroboam Machin, who was the impressive bumper winner on Saturday, really impressive, I thought, as well, streaking right away, is unfortunately out for the rest of the season. That was, I thought, really glum news to take out of the couple of days. Ampere Pass has been taken out of the Champion Hurdle and the Stayers Hurdle too. Aintree looks likely. If not Aintree, I think they'll put him away and go chasing next season. That's what I've read anyway. And a word on the Caldwell construction sale. We saw that they had a dispersal auction, didn't they, on Monday after racing at Leopardstown on the weekend. And we were all looking at it with huge amount of intrigue, weren't we, to see where these horses were going to go, which trainers they were going to go with, whether they stay with Gordon or not. Caldwell Potter, for those of you who didn't see, was the highest seller and I think broke the record for the highest National Hunt horse ever in terms of money to be sold. 740,000 went to Paul Nicholls for owners, including Sir Alex Ferguson. Fieldor stayed with Gordon. Rob Core bought him 620,000. I thought it was a hell of a lot, I have to say. Pied Piper 570 stuck with Gordon as well. And then my Triumph Hurdle selection, Mighty Bandit, has gone to Warren Greytrex at 420,000. I think there's a huge amount left in this horse. Naturally, before we move on with this, I did want to touch on this because it really grinded my gears a lot yesterday when I read the reaction on social media to Warren Greytrex receiving Mighty Bandit, with people saying, what are they doing sending it to Warren? Like, why would they give it to a trainer like that? All this stuff. Now, for people with short memories, and clearly a lot of these people on social media have got short memories, he has trained plenty of Grade 1 winners in the past. He's a top-class trainer, but you need the ammunition to get the job done. I don't think he's had it necessarily in the last few years. At the same time, this is what we're celebrating. We should be celebrating this. We should be celebrating horses going to smaller trainers, perhaps not quite so successful, and giving them an opportunity. Otherwise, we end up in positions like we've had at the Dublin Racing Festival, with Willie Mullins having all 8 Grade 1 winners. We're going to find ourselves in a monopoly or a duopoly like Gordon and Willie have had for the last few years, where all we get is the same people winning races. So I think it's absolutely fantastic that Warren has got Mighty Bandit. I know that he's my selection for the Triumph Hurdle. I don't know whether what they're going to do about Mighty Bandit going forward, but I'm really pleased. I don't know if either of you anything to think about kind of the reaction on social media to Warren getting that.
They have said he's going to go to the Triumph. They're aiming him there. I've seen that already. So I think they haven't diverted from the plan, really. They bought him the idea that he's a top-class juvenile, so they're going to go straight there. So he will run. And to be fair, he'll probably be disregarded somewhat in the market now to an extent because of what you've just said, really. I mean, the reaction told its own story.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't like reading it, put it that way. And then, Dan, I know that you might have something to say on Safureur, 330,000 stayed with Gordon.
I mean, him and Firm Footings went for 330 apiece. I mean, they're both horses I've had on my handicap radars, but that is an awful lot of money. I think, realistically, me and Jake discussed this. Who's going to buy Safureur? And we both said he'll stick with Gordon and go to Bective Stud. It just made too much sense, in a way, because he's just that kind of horse. My thoughts on him haven't changed. Obviously, I thought he'd run the DRF probably in the 2 mile 5 Grade 1 and come down the field, which probably would have happened. But if he turns up in a plate, he still has pretty much the same chance he would have previously. So nothing's really changed in that regard. And obviously, it's good to see Gordon kept hold of him because he wanted to keep him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jake, you got a general reaction to all that? I mean, it was a lot of good horses we saw getting dispersed.
Yeah, it was an exciting day. I sat down and watched it, and tweeting out as the sale was happening. And yeah, as you said, it was interesting. I think a lot of people have commented on the horses being overpriced. I think part of that is probably because Gordon was bidding on them all. Like, you're always going to have an underbidder, aren't you, when the trainer wants to keep these horses and he's got
His hand
owners
was
that
just
are...
like this the entire time.
Exactly, yeah. Like, I don't
One more.
think that you can say that they were all overpriced because of the general market or because people just wanted to spend stupid money. It was because Gordon was there underbidding on every horse. But he's done really well. He's kept pretty much everything that he wanted to keep. Obviously, he got unlucky with Caldwell Potter, but he was the underbidder, so there's not much more he could do. He had a budget for him, and he went over that budget. So best of luck to Paul Nicholls. The only other thing I would note is that Harry Durham did quite well out of it. He got Imagine very notably, and hopefully he does well with the couple of horses he's been sent, because he's a trainer that's on the up, and he deserves to have chances, like you said about Warren, but deserves to have chances with top horses because he's a trainer on the up, and I'm sure we'll be talking about him for festival handicaps in the future.
Definitely.
Let's move on then to the pièce de résistance of this show, which is our 6th Ante-Post bet selection for the Cheltenham Festival. I think this week, Jake, I'll start with you because it ties in quite nicely, doesn't it, with the DRF and the fact that your selection ran pretty well at the weekend.
Yeah, he's been on my list pretty much all season. Since we started the show, he's been on my list as a potential selection I could put up any week, where I didn't have one ready to go. And then last week it was between him and Percival as the horse I wanted to put pre-DRF. But I thought that more could go wrong with this horse, so I didn't put him up last week, and I was instead waiting until after he's ran. And that horse is Slade Steele. He obviously ran in the Grade 1 against Ballyburn. Now, in that race, just to touch on that first, I thought he ran an absolute belter. Obviously, I didn't mention it earlier in the show just because I wanted to save it for now, but I thought that he ran a fantastic race in second. I think he's a horse, kind of reminds me of In the Pocket last year, in the sense that I think he's a 2.5 miler, but he was obviously having to drop back the 2 miles because he missed the Lawlers and Nace due to it being too close to his last run, and Connections needs to get another run into him before the festival. But he's also a horse who can travel at the 2 mile pace, which I like for a horse in the Ballymore. He probably wasn't as noticeably well travelled as In the Pocket was last year, but he kept on well all the way to the line, maintained that 7-length gap between him and Ballyburn, as I said, the whole way to the line. I thought he was very good. A perfect prep for a horse who wants to go up and trip, in my opinion. And of course, if we just go back and look at his previous performances, he has already won over 2.5 miles. He won the Grade 2 at Navan in December. And I think it was a very testing day that day. The ground got really testing. It was absolutely pouring it down during the race. And I thought it was a comfier performance than it actually suggested. He won by half a length over Lecky Watson, but I thought he was valued for much more than that winning distance. I thought he was extremely good that day. And then obviously previous to that, he'd won over 2 miles, beating King of Kingsfield, who has been such a solid yardstick throughout the whole season. He's rated in the 140s. And I think you can set most form by King of Kingsfield at the minute. I don't think he's ran a bad race. I think he's ran to the same level pretty much all year round. So I think that he's got the form in the book. He's got the potential of stepping up in trip. Obviously, he was a point winner. He's got that form with Ballyburn in the bumper. He's now got the form with Ballyburn in the Grade 1. And I think, obviously, most of this bet does hinge on Ballyburn going to the Supreme to give it the best chance possible. But around 5-1 non-runner no bet, I think for Slade Steele was just a brilliant price. Henry de Bromhead knows exactly what he's doing with these type of horses in the Ballymore. We've seen it before with obviously Bob Ollinger. Obviously Rob Core know what they're doing. I think Rob Core basically always knew the plan with yesterday was to go to the Ballymore afterwards. And I did have a quick cheeky chat with Henry de Bromhead in the parade ring yesterday, just to see what he was feeling, and his thoughts were very much leaning towards the Ballymore himself. So I'm taking the non-runner no bet price because it's basically the exact same as the without non-runner no bet price. But Slade Steele and the Ballymore has been on my radar all season. Fingers crossed that Ballyburn will go to the Supreme and he can be the favourite for the Baring Bingham or the Ballymore, whatever we're calling it these days. And hopefully he'll go in because I think he's just a really classy animal.
I think he's a really solid play. Completely agree with you, Jake, have to say. Good stuff. Good luck with that one. Dan, before you go, I'm actually going to nip in first because I know that we're doing it for the same race, our selection this week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my weaker argument and then you can do your stronger argument after me. So I'm going to put up Favour and Fortune for the County Hurdle this week. Trevor Hemmings' horse, Alan King. or the late Trevor Hemmings, I should say, for trainer Alan King. Alan King, I think his last Cheltenham Festival winner came with Medinas in the Coral Cup, a few years ago. Hasn't been successful at the Cheltenham Festival. Oh no, it was Edwardstone, of course, wasn't it? Edwardstone won. So yeah, more recently than that. But he wouldn't have the most, a prolific Cheltenham record these days. But at the same time, we know he can do it. And Favour and Fortune has been on my radar for quite some time now as a horse who I think is very classy, but isn't quite at the top level as a novice. So far, we've seen him develop a really consistent profile and record over hurdles. He's been a victor in bumpers and over hurdles so far in his short career so far. And for me, his run behind Jinko Bay in the Tolworth hurdle at Aintree was a very strong one, but I think it was an indicator that he wasn't quite at the top level. And for me, Jinko Bay wouldn't be good enough to win at a Cheltenham Festival in novice company. So I don't think for that reason, Favour and Fortune would be either. So with that in mind, the fact that he's finished second in Tolworth suggests he has got plenty of class, but as I say, not good enough to be possibly taking advantage in a novice hurdle at the Cheltenham Festival. And I think he's 50-1 for the Supreme. So that sort of sums his level up, I think. That said, off a handicap mark of 136, which may or may not go up this weekend because he's entered 3 times, he's probably going to go to Exeter for a listed race on Sunday. And if he wins that, he might not even go up anyway. It depends, of course, the manner of victory. But I wouldn't be upset if he finished first, second, or third, really, in that race. I think his current handicap mark is very nice indeed, 136. He'll get into the county hurdle just fine. He'll get that extra qualifying run he's got on Sunday. And I can see him running very well. I think he's the type of horse that needs a strong pace that he can canter into. He came from the back in the Tolworth last time out. And let's not forget, he's still very unexposed, hasn't had too many chances yet. But at the same time, I think he's had the experience enough now, and we'll get plenty more on Sunday, to make sure that he won't be out of kilter in the hustle and bustle of that big county hurdle field. And hopefully he can come there with a late run for Alan King. But he's a horse that I've liked for a long time. I've been following him for quite a while now. And I do think he looks above average, but possibly not quite good enough to play with the big boys in novice company, but good enough to play with the slightly smaller boys of what is a very nice handicap mark in the county hurdle. So, Favour and Fortune is my Ante-Post tip for this week. And Dan, I know you're going to take me on.
I am indeed. Yeah, worth putting in mind that I put my one down first, so you had a choice to swerve this, but you were insistent. So
it's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, so no one can get the Trixies up anymore, which is a shame. So, well, you've ruined that plan, haven't you? We won't have another treble in this episode like we did last year. So I'm going to Willie Mullins for the county hurdle horse, and I would say anyone who watched the episode last week is almost nailed on that I'm going to say Zenta. And I'm not. For once, I'm actually not going to be a stereotype, because while I think she ran a very nice race, she went up 4 pounds to 142. I think there's a chance she could have done probably in the high 140s and may not even go. So, and she's now favourite as well. I think so. I would happily swerve. So instead, I'm going with another horse who ran extremely well, I thought, at the DRF at the weekend. And that one is Absurd, who's currently 16-1 best price without number no bet. There's 14s also available. The reason I'm going without is because if you have number no bet, he's about 10-1, 8-1. I just think that's far too big of a difference. And realistically speaking, this is just such a logical target. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't run. Obviously, in the case of Absurd, we're talking about a very high-class flat horse. Obviously, won the Ebor of 104, 7th in a Melbourne Cup, rated 110. That's a serious level of flat ability. You're not far off Wicklow Brave levels there. Obviously, he won a county before he turned into a surprise Grade 1 performer on the flat as well. And this race has been dominated by ex-flat horses in the past. 13 of the past 20 winners were off the flat, interestingly. And I think it's because of the demands this race places on horses. Obviously, run at a very strong pace, and it rewards hold-up performers who have that turn of pace at the end of a race. And I think that's going to suit him down to the ground, especially given that he's generally ridden with restraint. His hurdling career has been somewhat mixed. He won on debut in May on better ground over 2.5 miles. The form of that is nothing to write home about. That was kind of before he began his flat escapades. Then got turned over at odds on at Galway, but that was sandwiched in between a run at Royal Ascot and the Ebor. Not sure he was his best that day. Then was given a bit of a break after the Melbourne Cup and went to the future champions of his hurdle, which we know and we've discussed before was run in basically a swamp. And this is a horse who wants a better ground. He actually threatened like he might sneak into the race, but in the end, looked after once the conditions just got too much for him. He completely put a line through that based on the ground conditions. But the run that really makes him a contender to this race was his fourth in the Grade 1 at the DRF the other day. Held up on the inside, jumped far better than he has done in previous starts as well. I was actually really impressed when watching it back how well he jumped, because he has looked a bit fiddly at times, unsurprising given obviously his lightly raced profile and being a flat horse, but jumped really well, made a really eye-catching move between the second last and the last, really showed his turn of foot to get into contention, was only a couple of lengths off Ballyburn and Slade Still as they were kind of rounding the bend. In the end, I think the exertion he had to make to get to that point, and also the softer ground than you would have liked, took its toll. I don't think Brian Hayes really gave it everything in the closing stages, because he faded into fourth to be beaten by King of Kingsfield. I think that race is going to turn out extremely well. And I think there's a reality in which you're talking about maybe even 4 festival favourites are going to come out of that race in the shape of Ballyburn for the Supreme potentially, Slade Still for the Baring Bingham, as Jake's already suggested, and King of Kingsfield probably now I'd say maybe steps up in Trip to the Pipe, where I think he'll be extremely well supported for that. So I think there's a case Absurd could even be supported into favourite for the county hurdle in time. Obviously, bearing in mind, you draw the line through King of Kingsfield on his mark of 140. Based on a 3-length defeat to him, I would say you're probably looking at a mark in the high 130s for Absurd, who hasn't officially got a mark yet over in Ireland. So you're probably looking at a mark in the low 140s coming into a county hurdle, which generally is about where you want to be. And in general, you're talking about a horse with extremely high level of flat form, completely unexposed. Willie Mullins' record in this race, as we know, is just superb. I think since 2010, he's won it 5 times. And only 2 years when he's had a runner has he not had one in the frame. Like, that is pretty ludicrous to a certain extent. And he's just put in his best run over hurdles so far. His run style suits. And if it is ground on the better side, we know that's exactly what he wants. So I can see him running a superb race in this. Obviously, 16 to 1, I think, is a good price. And especially if we get good ground come the day, I can see him definitely probably going off the favourite.
It was the most comprehensive and cohesive argument, and completely outbattles mine. So best of luck. Best of luck with you, Dan, with that one, I have to say. Okay, that brings us to the end of what has been a jam-packed bumper show this week. Been a really enjoyable one, and obviously loads to look back on and reflect on from the DRF, and loads to look forward to too. So thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. And comment with your latest Ante-Post bet for the Cheltenham Festival. As always, we'd love to hear from you. So until next time here on The Jump Show, it's goodbye.